welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we are sewing, of course. That is what this setup usually means. So we are taking it back to the 1940s, 1944 to be precise. And I'm going to be using this pattern here, which is just a cute little, a little bit low-waisted button-up dress. I'm going to do the ruffle version here with the, I think, 3/4 sleeves. I don't have very many like longer sleeve dress, so I think it would be nice to do that. I'm going to have to probably do measuring and even sleeve adjustments, which is not my fave, but it is usually well worth it. And for the fabric, I'm actually really excited about this. So I got this fabric a really long time ago from my grandma when she passed, and I inherited, this is the only length of fabric I inherited from her that was long enough to make a dress. I thought first project of the year, kicking off with a fabric that's kind of sentimental to me would be perfect. I've had this in my stash since before I even started sewing, so I'm pretty excited to use it. I love the like kind of faded purple with the flowers and just the general like pattern of this, and this is like a really beautiful lightweight cotton. So it's going to be just a really great fabric. My other plan is, instead of making the ruffle out of the same fabric, I wanted to bring a little bit of contrast. So I have this kind of light tanny, probably cream, you would probably call this cream lace that I'm gonna pair with it. I was thinking of also putting it around the waist, but I've decided not to because I was thinking about the fact that around the, like, since it's below the natural waistline, I don't think that's quite what I want to accentuate. I think instead I'm just gonna use it up around the collar, and if I have enough, there's not much of this, but if I have enough, I'll use it around the cuffs of the sleeves. I'm pretty excited. I am gonna have to figure out what I'm doing button-wise for this. That'll come when it comes. I kind of decide buttons once something is fairly made up, because for me, if I wait till it's like pretty close to done, I can see what button I think fits best, whether it's something that melds with the fabric or it's something that contrasts. I suspect this one is going to be contrasted, but we'll see. So today I have probably about 4-ish hours to work, so I'm going to first start by cutting this out, and then I will be sewing as much as I can today. It is Sunday, so I plan on then picking this up again next weekend. Today, I want to get the cutting done for sure, obviously. I would love to get the bodice mostly done, so we're going to see if I can make that happen. I also am going to just take my time, so if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, and that's okay. But we're gonna go ahead and jump into cutting out my fabric. Alright, so I have taken my measurements on my arms, and I now know exactly how much bigger I need to make this. So what I'm first doing is I am tracing out the pattern onto some tracing paper, because I will need to be able to cut it up, and obviously I am not going to cut a like 50-60 year pattern. Once that is traced, I have drawn my cutting lines. I am basically cutting to like the seam allowance, and then I will use those points as hinges. This is what I learned in one of my sleeve adjusting classes that I took last year, so it's fun to put this into use. Fun is maybe a strong word, but I'm very glad I have this skill, because lately tight arms on garments have been one of my biggest like pet peeve sensory issues, so the fact that I can fix it is pretty darn cool. I basically need to widen the arm 1¼ inch all the way down, so I am taping that to the table once I get those measurements, again having used those hinges. I am pretty sure I did this right, but obviously if there is anything you would add to this technique, let me know. I never really take comments like that as being rude, because they help me improve my sewing. And then once everything is taped in place, I'm retracing this pattern and then cutting it out, and I have now made my adjustment. Yes, I know one of those lines is very wonky, but I cut it evenly, so it's fine. After all that work, I am now able to cut out my pattern. I'm just planning on pinking for seam finishes, so I don't have to worry too much about anything in the cutting process. So I'm just cutting away. This here is your reminder that I do now have monthly subscriptions over on both Patreon and Ko-Fi, where you'll get access to my videos early, as well as the ability to see what I'm working on and participate in polls that help produce future projects. So you can find that linked in the description description below. And for now, I'm pretty close to being done cutting out this fabric. This pattern calls for 3 different widths of bias tape. I don't have patience for that, so I just did 2. I did one that was 1.5 inches and another that was 2 inches. Yes, these are only slightly different, but one I'm going to use as a seam binding and the other will be used as like a binding you can see on the outside. That's the 1.5 inch. The 2 inch will be the seam binding. So that's what you see me cutting here, is just diagonal strips out of like kind of a big chunk of scrap fabrics. And while this pattern doesn't instruct me to use interfacing, I thought some interfacing under the buttons was a good idea. So I real quick traced out a pattern piece of that and then I cut it out. My last kind of project prep step is sewing the seams of the bias binding. I will start by focusing on assembling the bodice. Here I am marking in the dart. Both the front and the back have darts that I will need to make. Once marked, I'll be pinning those and getting them all prepped for the sewing machine. This pattern has 8 darts in it for the bodice. And after sewing the darts, I'm just tying off those ends. The last step I'm doing while all these pieces are separate, can we not fixate on that? Spooky is trying to hit my microphone as I record this voiceover. Spooky, hey. No, you can't bite that. So what I'm doing here is I am just folding over the edge of the facing so it will be finished and look nice at the end of this garment. And now with all that done, I am pinning together both the shoulders and the waist of this pattern. And because in the middle of this project I realized I had made a disastrous assumption on measurements, not including the darts, I am sewing this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance on the side seams. I am then pinking the seams before pressing them open. And with those pieces together, I can now put lace along the neckline. I am basting this a 1/2 inch away from the edge, making sure that like the thicker part of the lace will be covered by bias trim. And now I am sewing on that bias trim, wrong sides together, so I can eventually flip them all around and get the facing all set up. Here I am ironing that facing first with the lace pressed down, and then after that I'm going to flip it over once and then twice to have a completely cleaned up inner facing, which will then be easy for me to just sew on up. I also decided at this stage it would be the easiest time to sew the buttonholes with my button foot, as well as quickly throwing on some fray check for when I get to open these buttonholes up. At that point I had run out of steam, so this is an evening after work that I am quickly hand stitching this bias binding down. And then I am on the next weekend where I'm first starting by marking my darts. The sleeves have 3 darts each for the elbow, and I really wish we still made sleeves this way because I think it makes such a difference in the fit and like the look of the garment. And with the darts sewn in, I am now going to also run the gathering stitches for the sleeves. And then I'm pinning the 2 sides of the sleeves together. I am then, like usual, pressing this seam open after pinking it. Now it is time to focus on the hemming, I guess, of the sleeve. This instructs you to do a bias hem, so that's what I'm doing here is I am sewing on that bias strip before I will then understitch it so it presses really easy, and then I will double fold that bias and press it with the iron. I am then easing the sleeve into the sleeve head, making sure to match all the notches and marks that they have instructed me to. This I got pretty close, but the easing was not quite as clean as I desired. And then after sewing the armhole together, I am binding it with a double fold bias tape that I made. This is the 2-inch bias tape. This just keeps any raw seams and makes it really comfy, as well as reinforces the arm in case I make any big arm motions that might rip it. And then while everything is still separate, I am slip stitching the sleeves of this bodice down and adding lace to the cuffs. I will say I didn't have quite enough lace, so there's a tiny gap that I'm hoping won't be too noticeable because it's the innermost part of the sleeve. It is at this point that I realize I forgot to cut out pockets, and this year I am trying to add pockets to dresses where it is appropriate to do so, and this dress is definitely a good candidate for adding a pocket. So I took my own pocket piece that I've drafted and I cut out 4 pieces. I am then pinning the pocket where it belongs on each side of the dress, before then ironing those together and getting this ready to sew all the way around the pocket as well as down the sides of the skirt, so we have a closed side seam for the skirt and the pocket. And then once those are wrapped up, it is time for me to put in the gathering stitches for the skirt. I just put in 2 rows of stitching, one at 3/8 and then one at, I think it's like 3/4 inch from that, so that way the gathers in between those 2 lines are what I stitch through and they're really neat. And now I get to gather that up, again matching all the markings and notches that the pattern notes. And then I am again bias binding the waist seam. We're starting to get pretty close for me being able to try this on. I am popping in this interfacing for the zipper. This just helps the zipper stay firmer and not do as much weird stretching when I sew it in, because my preference when I do sew the zipper is to go a little rogue and not put in any pins, so having this fabric unable to stretch is a real benefit. At this point I have tried it on and the waist is much too big, which is a good problem to have, so I am just drawing these darts in a little further. I will be adding in basically a 1/4 inch to every dart around, so that will take out about 1.5 inches, and then I'm also going to take in a little bit on the sides so I can get the snatched waist I prefer. And once those changes are made, I am folding over the hem just once so that way I can have a clean edge to then hand stitch from. And 40s dresses usually are quite a bit shorter comparatively to 50s dresses, so usually I only have to hem these up by 1 inch, which is true today because that then has it sit perfectly where I would like it to sit. And now it's time for all the hand sewing, including putting on the buttons, hemming the dress. I also added a snap to the front and a hook and eye on the back on the top of the zipper. And then my last step is to open up these buttonholes using a seam ripper and some tiny sharp scissors. And now we are ready for the reveal. I can't wait to show you this dress. Alright, you have seen the reveal. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I am very excited to wrap this project up. As always, I have my spreadsheet here. We're going to do a budget breakdown. And then on top of that, I am also just going to discuss my general thoughts on this project. So for the budget breakdown, this does not count really, I don't think, towards my goal of making sure I have 1 out of 3 projects under $50 because I got the fabric for free. And I feel like it should be things that I buy because you aren't necessarily going to inherit fabric the way I did. So the fabric was $0 and it's really, really high quality vintage fabric because it's from my grandma. As far as notions, I spent $11.30 on notions because that includes buttons, snaps, lace, interfacing, thread, that whole gamut. And then as far as a pattern, I spent $14.28 on this pattern. So that brings us to supply total of $25.58. This is a fantastic price for a all cotton natural made dress because the buttons are actually shells. So I think this is a fantastic cost on this item. However, like I said, I feel a little weird choosing to use something free to be able to achieve that under $50 budget. Let me know if you think I'm just being weird or if you would actually like to see me be able to purchase supplies under $50 for a project. As far as labor hours, this took me 9 hours and 25 minutes, slightly longer than I expected, and I don't really have any rational reason for why that is. I feel like I just was moving a little bit slowly maybe. Like that feels like kind of a big amount of time for how simple this dress is. I think some of that would be due to the fact I had to like go back and refit it maybe and like add in deeper darts and stuff like that. that. And I guess like long sleeves always takes a little longer because doing the wrist is a little bit trickier when it comes to doing that on the machine. I don't know. I guess I added trim. Trim adds time. But yes, I would overall say that this feels like it took longer than it should have. As always, we talk about a living wage here on this channel. I guess I'm going to be adjusting for inflation next video because I forgot to do it this time. So we are using $32.70 for a living wage here in Seattle. I have lived off this wage in Seattle, and it is the first point in time in Seattle as a single person that I was able to not stress as much about every single cent leaving my bank account. So that is kind of what I describe as livable. Is to me, a living wage isn't like barely getting by. It's also having a little bit room to save, room to like treat yourself a little bit, because like we're all humans and every human deserves that, because we all know those billionaires be treating themselves left and right. So to me, a living wage involves treating yourself. Once we get that multiplied, we come to a total of $302.48 of labor, and that brings us to a grand total of $328.06. As always, this is not a one-to-one comparison with garment workers in a factory. I just want us to start thinking about the fact that labor is a cost in clothing. Actually, in the retail industry, fabric is the biggest expense of the clothing because of how little they pay for labor and how unfair their labor practices are, and I just think that's something to think about. This is not a good example of a project, but in almost all of my projects, the labor is the most expensive and should always be the most expensive part of a project. But with that, we can wrap it up. Here is the dress. I wore it to work today. I'm not gonna lie, this is not my favorite dress I've ever made. I do not intend to keep this pattern. I think I'm gonna sell it off pretty quick. Not the dress, the pattern. I actually think I will keep this dress a long time. The fabric has sentimental meaning to me, but that's not the only reason I want to keep it. While it's maybe not my favorite silhouette on myself, it's really, really comfortable. So this is like the perfect dress for me to just like wear around the house, right? I don't feel pretty or swishy or feminine in this dress. There's just something about this dress that doesn't quite fill that need for me. However, I wore it today to work. It is so comfortable. I was worried actually that I made the sleeves too loose, but after wearing it at work all day with like the ebbs and flows of like how your body kind of like swells up versus not, it was perfect. There was one point in time where I actually didn't feel like they were too tight, but like they would have been too tight had they been any tighter. I am very, very happy with my decision to upsize this where I did. However, the other place that I upsized it made it way too big in the waist. I don't know if that's also why this pattern is not my favorite, is it's not like tailored to my waist as much because of the way I upsized it really last minute and in a super sloppy way. I did end up bringing in those darts and it did help the fit a ton. The fit is just still not exactly where I want it to be for a 40s piece. This like to me fits on par with like 1980s Laura Ashley, where it's supposed to fit a little bit looser, and I'm totally fine with that. It's just when I'm expecting kind of like a cute little flirty 40s dress, that's not what I'm expecting. But yeah, I think I'm gonna declutter this pattern. I didn't like it enough to keep it. But that is just like how I feel in this dress. Otherwise the craft of this dress is very, very nice. I feel like I made this very well. All my seams are either bound or pinked. Aren't they spooky? I made clean and pretty seams. Why is your balance all messed up today? She's needing a lot of attention right now because I just got home from work, and usually that means all the attention is on her. Are you gonna just climb in my lap? Okay, that works. If you can stay in my lap, that's fine. Sewing wise, I would actually say this is sewn almost perfectly. I didn't get the sleeves quite as evenly eased in as I would have liked. There are still some nips and tucks in it, and I could not really tell from the pattern if there were supposed to be. So I might not have eased those in as smooth as possible, but I think the binding tape looks really nice. I guess the only other flaw would be the gap in the lace here, but you can't really notice it when I'm wearing it, so I think it's perfectly fine. Spooky. I think I did perfectly good work. I think it's just the pattern was maybe not the right style for me, and that's okay. We don't knock it out of the park 100% of the time. As sewists, it's just not possible. I'm like okay with it. I'm a little bummed that I don't love this dress a little bit more since it is made of some sentimental fabric for me, but like I said, I'll get lots and lots and lots of use of it because it's really, really comfortable. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of dresses that I wear a lot because they're really comfortable for me, but they also like still make me feel pretty enough. So it will get use. I might continue to look at altering it to be even tighter in the waist for me. That might make it work a little bit better for me. Other than that, as always, you can support my channel by buying me a coffee over on Ko-Fi. I put a lot of time and labor that is not paid fairly into this channel, and that's okay. This is mostly a hobby for me, but anything always like helps go to all the things that keep this channel running. And of course, please do not feel obligated to support me financially. I know it is not an easy time financially in the world right now, and you can always support me by commenting down below and giving this video a thumbs up. Oh, I also now have a Patreon, so you can find me over on that if you want to support me once a month. There's some perks in there. And of course, if you haven't, be sure to subscribe. I post content every single Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, most likely relating to either vintage or sewing. So I will see you then. Bye!